They still tell the Bloom Night wrong in Greyhaven Cove, when they bother to tell it at all. They say the sky tore first and the sea came second. I was there for both, and I can tell you the sea went first. It always does, in a fishing town. The water turned the color of a healing bruise an hour before the light fell out of the clouds, and every boat still out on the reef came running for the breakwater, like something down there had finally decided to stop being patient with us. I was 30 years into fixing what that water broke. Diesel engines mostly. Nets, sometimes. People, on the bad nights, though nobody paid me for that part. The Bloom was old news to us by then, a red mist that rolled up off the shoals every few years, thick as wet wool, and did something to a mind that got too much of it. Not death. Worse, in a small town. It made a man certain that his neighbor had always hated him, that the fish had always been stolen from his nets and not the tides, that the only sensible thing left to do was arm himself and go settle it. Greyhaven had buried people over what the Bloom whispered into them. Nothing you could see coming, until you'd seen it a few times. That night it came in thick, and while it was still rolling up the cliffs, something else came down through it. A long burning seam across the sky that ended in a crack like the whole reef had split. I went out with my truck lights and a coil of tow chain because that is what I always did when something wrecked on my coast, and I found a downed skiff wedged in the rocks below the point, hull scorched, hatch blown, and no crew. What I found instead was a child. Small enough to be lost inside a survival wrap 3 sizes too big, skin the gray-blue of deep water, a faint fold of gill slits along her throat that opened and closed like she was still deciding whether the air here was worth breathing. Her eyes were huge, black, and very still. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She looked at me the way you look at weather, waiting to see what it was going to do. I have never in my life made a slower decision look faster. I had her wrapped in my coat and up the cliff path before I'd finished deciding to do it. By the time I got her to my garage, the Bloom had the town by the throat. I could hear it already, men shouting down on the strand about salvage rights to the wreck, about what a ship like that owed a coast that had to clean up after it. Voices I'd known my whole life going flat and mean in a way the mist always made them go. Somebody was already calling it cargo. Somebody was already talking about what cargo like that might fetch from the compact patrol boats that came through twice a year collecting anything unregistered. I did not have a plan. I had a spare bunk in the loft above my engine bay, a girl who wouldn't stop watching the door, and 30 years of knowing every man in that mob well enough to know which ones would forget this by morning and which ones wouldn't. I kept her out of sight for 6 weeks. Told anyone who asked that I'd found the skiff empty and towed the wreck for parts, which was true enough as far as it went. She learned to move through my garage without a sound, learned the difference between the tools I needed handed to me and the ones I didn't, learned 3 words of my language before I'd learned one of whatever she called herself. I never did get her true name right in my mouth. I called her Wren, because she perched everywhere in that loft like she was ready to go if she had to, and she let me, which I took as the closest thing to permission I was going to get. Wren fixed a bilge pump 3 days before her people would have called that impossible. Wren sat in the truck bed and told me, in her flat 3-word grammar, which of the boats coming in were running hot before their engine lights ever told me the same. I've raised no children of my own. I did not know what I was doing. I only knew I was doing it. The wreck runners found me out in the 7th week. 3 men from the salvage crews, faces I'd known since we were boys together, come up the cliff road at dusk with a compact bounty notice folded in a coat pocket, and a story already agreed on between them, that I'd been hiding contraband off their reef, that it belonged to the patrol by law and to them by finder's right, and that a man my age ought to know better than to make trouble over a piece of unregistered cargo. I did not raise my voice. I have found, in 60 years, that raising your voice only tells a man you're afraid of him. I told them the skiff was towed and stripped for scrap the week it came in, same as I'd told the harbor register, and if they wanted to search a mechanic's loft over a rumor the Bloom had put in their heads, they were welcome to try it and see what the harbor board made of 3 grown men bullying an old widower on his own porch. They left. Men usually will when you give them a way to leave that doesn't cost them their pride in front of each other. I am not fool enough to think it was courage that turned them back. It was Tuesday, and it was getting dark, and none of them wanted the story told about them at the tavern the way I'd have told it. A compact skiff came through 11 days later on its regular sweep, and I gave them the same story I gave everyone, and they wrote it down and moved on, because an old man's garage in a town like Greyhaven was never worth the fuel to search twice. I kept Wren 2 winters. In the 2nd spring, a relief convoy came through running a proper manifest and a proper amnesty for the coastal towns, and I put her name, my name for her, since it was the only one either of us had ever agreed on a placement list instead of hiding her from one more sweep. I told myself it was because she deserved a life that wasn't spent listening for trucks on a gravel road. I have never been sure I told myself the truth. I only know I did it, and that it was the hardest afternoon of my life, and that I did not let her see that on my face when the convoy pulled away. 30 years I ran that garage after. The bloom came and went the way it always had. I got old the way engines get old, one worn part traded for another until the whole thing runs on habit more than health. Greyhaven forgot the girl from the wreck the way it forgets everything that isn't currently on fire, which is to say, completely, within about a decade. I did not expect to be remembered back. 3 winters ago the bloom rolled in heavier than I'd seen it in 20 years, and my knees picked that week to finally quit on me for good. Right as 3 of the old wreck runner's grandsons decided a half-deaf old man alone on the point was easier salvage than the reef ever was. I was on my back porch with a shotgun I could barely lift when the truck stopped at the top of my drive instead of coming down it, because there was a woman standing in front of them who did not belong to this coast and never had. Gray-blue skin gone silver at the temples the way her people age, gill slits steady and slow, and a look on her face I remembered from a child I'd carried up a cliff path 40 years before. She didn't raise her voice either. She'd learned that from somewhere. I don't know everything she said to those boys in the dark, only that their trucks were gone by the time she came down to the porch and sat with me until the shaking in my hands stopped being about the gun. She stayed the season, fixed the bilge pump again, same as the first time, out of habit more than need. Told me, in a grammar that had gotten a great deal better than 3 words, that a garage in Greyhaven Cove was still the only roof she'd ever chosen for herself, and she'd be damned, her word, not mine, and I was proud of her for it, if she was going to let this coast take the one man on it who'd ever let her choose anything at all. The town still doesn't tell it right, when they tell it. They say a woman came through Greyhaven that winter and ran off 3 salvage boys with nothing but a look. That part's true enough. What they leave out is that I'd found her first, 40 years before, wrapped in a coat 3 sizes too big, on a night the sky and the sea both came apart at once. And that of everyone in this whole forgetful town, she was the only one who never once forgot who'd carried her up that cliff.